So your triceps refuse to grow. Maybe you have a big chest with noodle arms. I feel you. I was torso dominant for years until I began experimenting with the tips you're about to learn. My first and most crucial suggestion is to start doing all your presses, yes, all, with a closer grip. Forget about wide, forget even about being slightly outside shoulder width apart. Narrower equals superior triceps recruitment across the board. And most importantly, you'll get more arm bend in the bottom, and that's the missing link between guys who naturally get big arms from compounds versus those who isolate like madmen. Truth is, around 70 to 80% of your total upper arm circumference will come from presses. Let's not deny that fact. You can't just be an isolation bro. But the way you approach those compounds and relate them back to your anthropometry is key. For instance, those who are not built to bench typically end up arm dominant as their upper arm goes way past 90 degrees in the bottom, especially with a closer grip. It's a curse for strength, but a blessing for triceps hypertrophy. So these guys can often have the same muscular measurement as a shorter lifter who's benching 50 to 100 pounds more, which is not an exaggeration in the slightest. That said, the vast majority of lifters do not fall into this camp. And by default, we're all relatively average, so chances are, if you're watching this video, you require specialized pressing. And what I figured out after years of trial and error is that maximizing the arm bend such that the elbows are pointed straight down to the floor, not to the walls, is the simplest solution yet. It's not about overload. Otherwise, powerlifters with extreme arches would have the biggest triceps. It's truly about disadvantaging them as much as possible. And on that note, if you have access to the arch nemesis Swiss bar by Bells of Steel or a rackable easy bar, I strongly recommend both for close grip pressing, since you can assume the narrowest grip of all without causing wrist discomfort. And just so you know, bodybuilders have always done it in this fashion. Of course, at the cost of their joints, but now you don't have to experience any of those downsides. Alternatively, you can also do neutral grip dumbbell pressing, especially at an incline. It's gonna wreck your triceps. In addition, a powerlifting close grip bench is not the same as a bodybuilding close grip bench. One is closer to the rings, the other has at least one finger in the smooths. You are not trying to move the most amount of weight, but do know that eventually, you most certainly can work up the psychotic numbers. Like my best close grip bench is 380, only 25 pounds less than my all-time medium grip PR. I also haven't done wide grip pressing in years, which I believe has spared my shoulders. This allows me to put more volume into my triceps with less fatigue. So all close grip presses, no matter the angle, being flat, incline, overhead, are most directed on the triceps, easiest on recovery, and don't have cons even for strength development. As Louis Simmons always said, close grip will build your wide, but a wide might not do the same for your close. Essentially, if you focus on base dummy strength and become a close grip maniac, eventually, when you do correct this weakness and want to go heavier, progressively going wider will be an easy transition. This way, you can achieve peak performance without exclusively relying on high specificity. You want to specialize to such an extent that an inferior close grip feels best. That's the secret. And on that note, if your arms are extra stubborn or if they're shorter like mine, I strongly advise abusing low incline pressing between 15 and 30 degrees, but not for upper chest bias. In fact, I can even tell you to arch your back like crazy. So that's going to be a nice indirect bonus, and the close grip actually does stimulate the clavicular portion better since you're more lined up with those fibers, but that's not the objective. You're doing this to get the elbows past 90 degrees. So find your sweet spot. Continue raising that bench until you determine what's suitable for your build. And yes, we really are all that different, which you can quickly figure out by recording yourself from a front or side profile. Oh, and by the way, the same angle philosophy applies to all presses, including push-ups. It's about principles, not exact exercise. So you'll want to do your push-ups off a decline around 12 to 16 inches high, utilizing a diamond hand placement. That's how you maximize the arm bend similar to an extension. So if you're not getting that because some arbitrary standard like the floor is stopping you, then it doesn't matter that on paper it's a triceps dominant press. Without factoring in anthropometry, you're training like a cookie cutter gym bro. Simple enough? And in my opinion, the new bench press for optimal triceps development is 100% the incline close grip barbell version or the decline diamond push-up. If minimalists just want to press, it's got to be one of those two, or dips, but more on that later. Now regarding isolation work, you really don't need that much volume. Just pick 2 effective isolation exercises per workout and repeat them twice a week or variations thereof. Can even be 2 sets each, preferably to failure, for a minimum total of 8 direct sets of high intensity triceps stimulation. And the way you can simplify programming is by executing 1 push down and 1 extension in that exact order. Why? Because extensions are notorious for destroying people's elbows. And if you don't have the best biomechanically sound variation, you'll obviously be using basic equipment. Or in general, if you got achy elbows or hypermobility, you can't do too much, the area starts to get sensitive, well, even with the perfect exercise, a lot of lifters will still have some pain. So if that is you, why would you not want to drive in that synovial fluid with push downs that are rather elbow friendly, such that you can spam them to infinity and never have problems? Like, Matt Wenning used to prescribe 300 push downs a workout, and I followed that advice for a long time. Not once did I have discomfort. Never in years of doing this. So push downs are my number 1 for a very good reason. They flawlessly warm up your elbows and provide a great stimulus in their own right. Then you get more out of less weight for the upcoming extensions. Plus, there's the synergy of squeezing on your push downs and stretching on your extensions. Speaking of which, for extensions, you really want to focus on that lengthened position. Control the out of that negative. Stop with this roll back ego nonsense. You're just catching and throwing weights around with momentum. Like, bro, I can easily do the 60s with that kind of garbage form. But when I use strict technique, 40 to 45 pounds max is difficult. And you know what? Many times I'll even use the 35s. I worked up to having 17-inch arms without having to kill my elbows. Stop worrying about the weight. It literally doesn't matter. And you can acquire equal triceps gains in the 5 to 30 rep range. Also, you don't want to be doing skull crushers, aka bringing your hands to your forehead. That's a great way to shut off your long head and make it more lateral and medial focus, which you've already done so much of with your compound movements. Or JM press, which I'll talk about later. In my opinion, you should double down on long head work using different resistance profiles, because that's what's going to make the biggest difference in your arm size. So when isolating, majority of times, you want to do decline or overhead extensions coupled with dual rope push downs. A single rope might be a waste of time given the overcoming of lateral forces and inability to properly extend the shoulder with external rotation. You're stuck here, unable to get a nice squeeze in comparable to a triceps kickback. And you can even try this yourself while standing up. Tell me you don't feel your long head much more. Come on. That's your solution. Now, you will drop a lot of weight. You might go from 90 pounds to 50 pounds. And you know what? That's okay. Make it your default and always go to failure. It doesn't generate a ton of fatigue. Also, you can do cross body extensions if you go to the gym and have a functional trainer. But be aware, it's often taken. So you're gambling there. Anyway, that's why I think it's easier to just do 2 ropes. And if you're going to complain, well, bring your own rope to the gym. It's only going to cost you $20, and a year from now, you might have gained an extra inch. Seems worth it to me. Basically, you'll want to primarily do long head push downs, let's say 70% of the time. Then the other 30%, you want to complement it with a more stable push down. That's just straight driving it down. This provides a good blend because traditional push downs will better feed into your bench press. So through experience, I found that you can't exclusively, even though it's most important, use the best triceps exercise. So every couple of weeks, you want to rotate in normal pushdowns. Furthermore, when it comes to arm days, which I do recommend if your arms are lagging, consider switching close grip bench for JM press. Truth is, you don't need additional delt and pec volume if you already hit your maximum recoverable volume from previous compounds. Because in arm days, it's typically going to be the third or fourth session where the muscles overlap. So if many aren't doing chin-ups on arm days and favor barbell curls instead, why are they then performing close grip bench when they're obviously not recovered from the last day or two? Like there's a pressing volume threshold that once exceeded is not doing you any favors. So it's smarter to dial things back for the torso and simply isolate with a comparable enough motion. So the jam press fits that role perfectly. It'll still allow you to lift relatively heavy, get almost identical stimulation, but now you're strictly targeting the triceps. This way, for the lateral and medial head, you're not further digging into that recovery hole. So for an arm day, you can perform 3 triceps exercises, but it's because the JM press doesn't really count as a true isolation, even though that's kind of what it is. After all, it's a hybrid between a close grip bench and a skull crusher. Therefore, you'll still want to start with pushdowns, even though the JM press is what provides the largest raw stimulus and overload. Start with pushdowns, followed by JM presses, and then extensions. Done. Oh, and one more thing about elbow recovery, since this could be a concern here. Because isolation work is where you can get achy, I'd strongly recommend throwing in band pushdowns on your off days, or even at the end of your session. And my new updated method is the dual banded version. So you're gonna choke your bands to each corner of the pull-up bar, form an X, and then extend behind the body. Go as fast as possible. Never worry about control or maximally squeezing. Just rep it out at full speed. And I found that doing 3 sets of 30 to 50 make your elbows feel godly. And then for extra insurance, consider wearing elbow sleeves for close grip presses, extensions, or JM presses. Just to say, a lot of guys love wearing knee sleeves because it keeps their knees warm for heavy squats, yet somehow elbow sleeves aren't that popular. Guys, I've been wearing them for years. I got my first pair in 2017 and never looked back. They provide more stability to your elbows and feature compression, thereby promoting recovery. I don't view this as a masking problem at all. Your arms are just gonna feel like a volcano. Plus, you don't have to wear them the entire session. Maybe just do so for the warm-up or potentially more risky exercises. And you basically have the same strength without them, unless you're using double ply or triple ply sleeves, which I don't recommend, but the regular ones you buy at most help by 5 to 10 pounds, if that. But even then, it could be a stretch because the evidence on knee sleeves, which are way bigger, shows they don't work for raising numbers. So for elbow sleeves, it's even less than what you would expect. Now to backtrack a bit, besides bench press and push-ups, there is one exercise that has built a lot of big triceps over the years, and that is the weighted dip. Specifically in the street lifting world, gymnastic world, and even old school bodybuilding world. Just think of Marvin Eder. It's been stated that the dip is the upper body squat. So just like squats will build your quads, dips will build your triceps. It's essentially the same movement pattern. In a squat, the femur is getting close to parallel, and in the dip, the humerus is getting close to parallel. Then the forearm is tilting forward maybe around 20 degrees or so, with the squat doing a bit more with the tibia. That said, I've actually heard this as a criticism, that because the forearm is mostly vertical, then by default, it has to be a lot more shoulders and pecs, which is technically true, but fails from an outcome perspective. Like your torso is gonna thicken up like crazy, but the thing is, the absolute load of the dip still equates to a tremendous amount of mechanical triceps loading. So if you're only doing bodyweight dips, that in itself is like doing dumbbell extensions with a relatively intermediate weight. And so you can imagine what slapping on many plates would do. The indirect triceps work is comparable to doing heavy extensions. It is what it is. And so the only reason why dips maybe didn't work for you is because you weren't strong enough. Or, which is most likely, shoulder and pec recovery was a problem. so you couldn't rack up that additional volume for the triceps. After all, you're getting a maximum weighted stretch, and the deep lengthened position takes a lot out of you. But aside from that, we can absolutely assert that it's one of the better presses for triceps and even your long head. And when you go to failure, it's very difficult to lock out your elbows. You can easily get stuck at the top, and you best believe the contractions are phenomenal. So weighted dips will pack on mass on almost anyone's triceps, even if you are somewhat torso dominant. The only exceptions appear to be super lightweights who have top 1% pound for pound strength and hyper specialize at an early training age. But for most lifters, if they just treated dips as a pure hypertrophy triceps motion, using good controlled form, staying relatively upright, kicking those elbows back, and piling on those plates, eventually results are guaranteed. And one more tip for additional triceps bias is to stay in your active dipping range. So when your forearm is maximally tilted, it can't go further down, and you feel your shoulder wanting to cave in. Going any lower than that is not necessarily recruiting the triceps more. Now, if you don't like this idea, your team full ROM, no problem. You can still do full range of motion, but at least manipulate the resistance profile such that the bottom isn't the heaviest portion. This is where chains come into play, but not throwing them on your neck. You just clip them directly on your dip belt and get to work. Initially, I thought I coined this, but it turns out that Joe Bennett has been doing this for years with his pro bodybuilding clients, which is awesome because he is the hypertrophy coach. So here, when you're in the deepest stretch position, the chains are mostly unloaded. And then as you start to press out, they lift off the ground, specifically in your active range for the triceps, turning it into more of an isolation exercise, if that makes sense. And then one more alternative, if you don't want to set this up, there's also the machine dip, which allows you to adjust the exact pressing height. This way, you can drive all the tension into the triceps. And what's great about this machine is that it's way more stable. So not only are you getting the perfect range of motion for dips, motor unit recruitment for the triceps is insane. So I'd actually say this might be one of the best compound movements in existence for triceps. Like imagine doing a stable, way down, ego lifting push down, but your arms are behind the body. Like if dual row push downs were a heavy compound movement, it would be the dip machine press. Try it out, you won't regret it. And then one more bonus point about accommodating resistance. It could be very useful for triceps specialization. Certainly did wonders for my lateral head, and conjugate promoters typically don't have problems here, which makes perfect sense because triceps are one of those muscles that actually do benefit from the short position. So if you're neglecting those top end joint angles where your leverages are so good, you're missing out on some gains. Plus before I mentioned how you want to get a deep arm bend on presses, right? Well, when you do this, just like in a dip, you're also getting more shoulders and chest, which is great if they're the lagging area, but if you want disadvantaged leverages with the triceps biasing effect without making the torso muscles a limiting factor, why not incorporate bands or chains? There's proportionally more straining at the top, and that feeds into everything by also helping your extensions and pushdowns while reducing overuse problems in the elbows, which is the biggest detractor that's going to hold back your triceps gains. Like once you start experiencing inflammation, you will need to back down on everything shown today. So you do want to stretch your triceps, but you also want grinding reps, particularly towards those end ranges. So chains alongside reverse band, not for raw carryover, but to fucking strain, will be your best options since they're not hard on the negative or cause instability. And please don't use a lot of tension. 15 to 30 pounds is more than enough here. A little goes a long way. It should feel like a spotter is slightly assisting you towards the top where there's normally very little torque on the elbow. That's how you make any press feel like a solid machine. Heck, you should even do this on the Smith machine. It's even better because now everything is super stable and you have an ideal resistance profile for the triceps. Doesn't matter if it's unconventional, just do what works. And with that said, based off these tips, you should now have a good base of knowledge to bust through your current triceps growth plateaus. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what resonated with you most, and I'll see you in the next stubborn muscle video.